And we are on, saying God afternoon to everybody. Minister Paul Scott, and today, Truth Minister Paul Scott. Excited, for lack of a better word, to have a scholar who's written one of the best books about hip hop. Now, you know, as a writer myself, we don't co-sign too many other writers. But in this case, this is one of the best books on hip hop, covering hip hop. And I want to thank Sister Veronica, because the reason I was turned on to this book is because Sister Veronica actually sent 4 copies for me to give out in the hood in my city. That's how I initially got turned on to this book. And I read the book, and the book is excellent. So, and brother donated even some more books to our Black Hoodie Brigade, so we can go out in the community of Durham, North Carolina, and teach this truth in the hood. So I'm honored to have Brother Bernard Kramer, who's in Chicago, if I'm not mistaken.
DC.
In DC.
Mm-hmm.
In DC.
Yeah, from Chicago, though.
From Chicago.
Yeah.
So I'm very honored to have this brother on the show today, because there's so much going on in hip hop. So much critique going on in hip hop. People were celebrating the 50th year anniversary last year, but without taking a deep dive into what the information that's in this book. So without further ado, I'm honored to present to you all Brother Bernard Kramer.
Hey, I'm happy to be here, man, and I'm honored to be here, and I appreciate that glowing feedback from the book, man, for real. I appreciate that, and shout out to Veronica for making that introduction. And I appreciate you, brother, for what you're doing in Durham, North Carolina, man, because we need our soldiers out there, and we definitely need Black men to reach these youth. That's major. So I appreciate you, but once again, thank you for giving me access to your platform, bro.
No, I'm honored, brother. So let's start this off. Because this is going to be kind of rapid fire today. So, you know, we can put it on YouTube, put it on Instagram, and spread it out across the country. Give us a little bit of your background and how, as they say, how you first fell in love with hip hop.
Well, I grew up in Chicago, so my first love is house music. But being a 53-year-old, of course, soul music in general was our background. You know, I grew up listening to the music that my mother and father listened to. And so that kind of transitioned into house music, which transitioned to disco, all of that, and eventually hip hop. I didn't get a taste of hip hop till probably junior high school, but from there it was on and popping. And it was One Tone Master Tape that pretty much set it off. I remember 6 in the morning was on there with Ice-T. And I remember Rhyme Pays and Paid in Full from Eric B. and Rakim was on there. I remember the first tape that I bought was Ultramagnetic. And Kool Keith was my favorite rapper for the longest. I used to listen to that tape, and it was a tape. It wasn't a CD or nothing. So you just letting it ride. You letting the tape ride. You know, when the reversible cassettes came out, I was on 10. When it would turn, when it would turn over by itself, and you could just let it ride and let it ride and let it ride. But that brings back memories for me. Hip hop, in terms of what it did for us culturally, a large part of hip hop was conscious. It was teaching us. And so while I was a gifted student when I was younger, I wasn't necessarily a reader. I wasn't intentional about getting that information. And so the introduction to the information for me, who I was, what our history was, our ancestry was KRS-One. You know, Brand Nubian, Public Enemy, listening to those groups, Poor Righteous Teachers, groups that was teaching us. They were intentional, they were conscious, they were reading, and they was pushing that information out there to dope beats, De La Soul, Tribe Called Quest, and it was good music. So not only was it conscious, it was feel good music. So I just remember the vibe, going to the parties. You know how you party into, You Must Know by KRS One. You know what I mean? My philosophy, questions and answers, banging beats behind it, but also banging you in your brain and leaving something in your subconscious for you to grow from. So all of that kind of resonates with me in terms of hip hop. But my career background is as an educator. That just happened accidentally because I thought I wanted to be an accountant and thought I wanted to be an attorney in undergrad. But as I got to know myself, I knew I didn't want to do either one of those things. But I fell into a job accidentally as a teacher for 1 year without being certified, and I enjoyed it. And so went on ahead and got the necessary credentials to become a full-fledged teacher. I've done that off and on for about 15 years, and I've also worked in an administrative capacity too for at least 5 or 6 years. But I love these kids. The happiest part of the job, the most peaceful part of the job for me, and having a job, because I don't think that we should necessarily be tied to a 9 to 5, but that's another conversation. But the peace for me comes from being around these kids, being able to impact them directly, and having them teach me, because they keep you young. They keep you in tune to what's going on today. But we still have a responsibility to impart to them, whatever nuggets that we might have. And I'm not one that believes that as an elder, you automatically have good stuff to impart to our kids, because you have to be intentional. A lot of these elders shouldn't be saying nothing to these kids. They should just be quiet and going about their business and make their money. But having that direct contact with the kids and watching how our kids' behaviors have transitioned over the years, you had to start asking questions. I'm working with these kids and I'm seeing the murders go up. I'm seeing the fights go up with the boys. I'm seeing the introduction of more shootings. And I'm also watching the girl fights tick up to the extent where the girls are fighting and becoming more increasingly violent than the boys are. The boys are standing to the side, raising their skirts up, watching the girls fight. But these girls are trying to rip each other's hair out, poke each other's eyes out. Like, I've seen some of the most violent fights from the girls.
Wow.
Boys fight, it's a quick skirmish and it's over. But I'm watching this and I'm watching the parallels of what's coming in through the music. Because we grew up, I listened to NWA. I loved it as a kid. We didn't know no better. Dope beats, dope lyrics. Ice Cube was a hell of a writer. MC Ren was a hell of a writer. They could write. And so, we get in the lyrics, we get in the lyricism, which is hip hop, and we get in the beats, which is hip hop. And so we fell in love with NWA, but that was pretty much like, for me, that was a transition. And my favorite group was Mobb Deep coming up. So that just gives you, I listened to that music, and all Mobb Deep talked about was killing, kill, kill, kill. Every single song, it was gunplay, but they did it in such an artistic way. Again, dope beats and lyrics. That's Mobb Deep all day. Them brothers could rhyme. And Havoc had the coldest beats ever. So that pretty much entranced us. I was younger. I didn't realize, or I didn't understand the purpose or the function of a subconscious at all. And so I'm just listening. We party into this music. And the music is getting more and more violent. And so even having a college degree, I remember, for me, I can't speak for anybody else, but I remember me wanting to fight and seeing other black males in a certain way, like, wait for somebody to step incorrect with a chip on my shoulder. And I didn't come from that. I came from a quote unquote middle class home. Middle class, I say that very loosely because none of us are really middle class, but I didn't come from that. And so for me to feel like that, I can think back on it now, like, a lot of the behaviors that I engaged in was pretty much, number one, it was probably peer pressure, hanging out, but it was also the music that I listened to, ad nauseum every day, every minute of the day. I'm pumping Mobb Deep, and I wanted guns. What I want a gun for what? You know what I mean? And so you get older. There was a cat that woke me up and made me start reading, Dr. Lance Williams, and I was in my late 20s, early 30s. And once, I was already a gifted student, but no one had ever introduced to me the fact that I should be reading books. Nobody, not a teacher, not a professor, not an adult in the community. You should be reading, brother. You should be reading, young brother. But we had a conversation on the stoop, or the porch, as we call it in Chicago. And he exposed to me how ignorant I was, how much I didn't know. The first 2 books he gave to me was, or he introduced me to, was from N-words. Can I say the word on this show? I usually don't use the word, but the books were called From Niggas to Guys. I don't even use the word, but just so everybody knows what the books were. The books were by Akil. I read volume 1. I read volume 2. From then on, I just started reading exponentially because the light had been turned on by those books. That was the only thing that was missing from my life. I was always rebellious. I was always relatively smart. He pointed me in the right direction. And so I grew as a man from there. I grew as an African from there. But from those books, I started reading Amos Wilson, the psychologist, black psychologist. And I started thinking like an African. And I'm listening to this music and I'm realizing that I don't like it no more. You know what I mean? Like the more African I became, the more conscious I became, the more I came to understand psychology and how the subconscious works. I'm like, we literally listening to music telling us to kill each other and hang each other and to hate each other and to disrespect our women. And then I'm watching the behaviors tick up at the exact same time while the music is getting increasingly worse. And so if the music is getting increasingly worse, the shows are getting increasingly worse on the TV, the movies, we already had a blaxploitation era that the conscious in our community from 1970 to 1980, they fought off to get off of these movie screens. But from those movies, that gave birth to where we prolifically want to call each other N-words and B-words without even thinking about it. Like we don't, it's not even a second thought now. Now we're proud N-words and now we're proud B-words. But they stamped that fire out. We had the Black Power era. We had conscious hip hop. And so they killed all of that. They put it to rest. I think it was Wise Intelligence that basically pointed out the fact that when Rodney King got beat down, we reacted correctly. When Martin Luther King, Malcolm X were assassinated, we reacted correctly with anger. We tore stuff up. We burned down cities. That is the logical reaction to watching your leaders, watching your brothers, watching your fathers be murdered, by the enemy. Nowadays, I grew up in Chicago. Again, I'm out here in DC now. I lived in Dallas for a minute, but in all three of those communities, you literally have teenage boys that are murdering babies, murdering our elders, murdering our women, killing each other, disrespecting the women. At the same time, 77,000 Black women are disappearing every single year, and brothers are getting incarcerated, but all of the music is literally providing a script for all of that to occur. Mm. And so it's to the point where 10 songs on the radio each hour on each urban station or whatever, they're literally providing the backdrop or the soundtrack for what's happening on the streets.
Let me ask you. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, brother.
No, go ahead, brother. I've been talking.
No, you're good. You're good. I enjoyed the background, but you mentioned NWA. Mm-hmm. Let me preface this. It's a two-part question. First question. Do you believe that the elders in the community in 1988-89, did we drop the ball when it came to addressing so-called gangster rap when it first came through the door?
Okay, for me, my first inclination when it comes to any of the manifestations or symptoms of oppression, which we've been dealing with for 400 or 500 years, is to not blame us, not point the finger at us. Malcolm X taught me that. And so my first inclination is to go, what put us in a position to not be well-tooled or well-armed to deal with what they're targeting us with? During that time, we did have some elders, goodness gracious, not Shirley Chisholm, but the sister.
Dolores Tucker.
Thank you. See Dolores Tucker. They tried to speak on it, but maybe her context, I would never speak against her because everything she said came into fruition, everything. But she was in a position where it could have easily been dismissed because she came from a background of, bougie politics.
Can I give you my Dolores Tucker theory right quick?
Definitely.
I think that the industry needed C. Dolores Tucker because that's the face of opposition they wanted America to identify with. If you are going against so-called gangster rap, you look like her. No disrespect to the elder. You are an elderly Black woman. Because remember, at the same time or even predating C. Dolores Tucker, you had Minister Conrad Muhammad, who is now Reverend Tilly. Mm-hmm. You did not hear in the mainstream about Conrad Muhammad at the time, but they made sure they put C. Dolores Tucker up as the anti-gangster rap person. I think that was intentional. Go ahead, bro.
Yeah, yeah. And again, I would never slight her because her message was correct, but it was just miscontextualized. And I think if she would have took a little bit more time, I'm not going to dismiss and say she didn't talk to the artist, but I think her mistake was saying all of hip hop and all of rap. Because that literally, that's incorrect. And you still have elders today that say hip hop in general is bad. It's an art form. We had people, the elders dismissed every music form that came out, when it first came out, because it was new and it was a little bit, funky than what they were used to, what they grew up with. It's a little bit more conservative. Hip hop is definitely not conservative. It was the message of the streets, it was the message of the youth, and it spoke to what was going on the streets. In truth, it was literally our newspapers. And so I don't slight her, but I think in terms of our people not being prepared for it, I didn't know, as an adult. As a teacher, as a history teacher, I didn't understand the impact of media, the impact of propaganda, the nature of the war that we're dealing with, and music being as an art form, our culture, all of our art forms basically being weaponized and turned against us and profitized. It's a lot to understand, and you have to be intentional about understanding that. So if you've been cultivated to look at entertainment, look at music, look at movies, look at television as entertainment, that's all it's going to be for you. Like, you're never going to see the other side where this stuff is being weaponized, because I certainly did not. And it took me a long time to realize, wow. And even when you're watching television, it's hard for people to understand that it's not about the TV shows. It's about the commercials. It's about the money they make from posting those ads. So every ad that's posted on the television is based around what the TV show is. You watching football, you got all commercials that are targeting black men, white men, people that's looking to buy cars. All of that is crafted. They don't care about the shows. They care about the money they're making from the advertisement, where they're selling $1 million and $2 million 60-minute slots.
Because St. Ives Malt Liquor made a lot of money in the early 90s.
Yep.
By commercializing the music, hip hop. Go ahead, brother.
Yeah, they were just, that was a side dish for us, us getting addicted to malt liquor, because they already had us. Again, we're at war. And that's another thing we don't understand as a people. We are at war. We literally are at war. Our people are dying. We're still in last place in this country, and we've been here longer than anybody. And we're still the most mistreated, but we don't understand it, because now we can get paid and we can buy stuff. And that's the distraction. You can watch TV. We have proximity. We can participate in activities with white people. We can marry white people. We can go to school with white people. And so that kind of erases, that takes the edge off. The more money you make, the softer that cushion on your behind is. You don't feel the oppression of those whose behinds might be a little closer to that concrete, that are not making as much money. And that same dynamic goes all the way back to the plantation, where if you gave a couple of the slaves a little bit more money, you brought them into the house, you dressed them up nicely, you gave them access to the chariot, they got to eat better food. Their interest and the interest of those in the field are not going to be the same. And so we're still dealing with that today. We're dealing with classism within our communities. And so you got individuals that are making money where they can't be concerned with what's going on in the streets, the children being murdered. That's not their interest. Their kids are going to private schools or Catholic schools or whatever. And so a lot of us, I would say some subconsciously, most subconsciously, have, as a result of compensation and socialization, they don't even see the streets. But that's a function of the system, though, to create caste within us, among us.
Let me ask you this, brother. NWA was just announced Friday, I believe, is being given the Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award. Kool Herc is too, but I think Gladys Knight, Kool Herc, NWA. What are your thoughts about NWA being rewarded with the Grammy and Achievement Award?
It's par for the course. The Grammys is white folks, Europeans, European Jews, who mostly own hip hop, pretty much congratulating those young brothers for a job well done. N words with attitude. So now I can't participate in a conversation with another black man without being called an N word, or having a brother, constantly addressing our women as B words. And I'm the one that irritates everybody, because I'm like, dude, respectfully, brother, stop calling me an N word. Brother, while we're talking, please stop calling these sisters B words. And you have to be intentional. If you understand how this is going, you have to put it in people's heads, like make them think twice about what they're doing, about what they're talking about. But as far as them being presented with awards, I mean, they're getting patted on the head for a job well done.
And especially based on the history of the Grammys and hip hop. Now, KRS-One called it out about a month ago.
Mm-hmm.
But if you can remember, in 1988, I think it was, Will Smith and Jazzy Jeff actually led a boycott against the Grammys because of their treatment of hip hop. So for them to be awarding NWA in 2024 is real interesting.
Yeah, it's funny. I remember when Will Smith disrespected Tupac and another artist, said that he was over in Africa and he saw Tupac spray painted on the side of a hut or a house or whatever, and said that he thought that was unfortunate that Tupac was being celebrated across the globe. But I'll never forget he said that, though. That was a long time ago too. But yeah, Chuck D was the voice that I listened to back then. And I remember him saying clearly, who gives a F about a Grammy? And so that's resonated with me. But as they've changed us over and created, the creation of the Negro is what's that brother from Arrested Development? Speech. The N-word factory. They're creating N-words. And so now we're at the point where we're clamoring to be celebrated by people that hate us. We're clamoring to be celebrated by them. We went from not caring about them to understanding how they were disrespecting us, how they don't care about us, how they'll never care about us, and how they reward the most ignorant elements of our culture, or what they present as culture. We can't wait to be celebrated by the Grammys and to have them acknowledge and validate us. And I'm glad that KRS-One spoke on it, though. I'm really glad he spoke on it because it's kind of sad to watch, but again, I don't blame our people because a lot of us don't understand how propaganda works. And if we're not getting in these schools and teaching these kids, I don't spend a whole bunch of time. I do teach adults and I embrace opportunities to teach adults, but I focus on these kids because these kids' minds are a lot less calcified, and they're more curious still. The older we get, we tend to get less curious. Our mind becomes impervious to information. We don't want to hear anything new, and we just pretty much accept what is. But we have to beat these kids in the head with what is the fact that we are at war, and that we have to arm them for this war so they don't grow up to think of the Grammys as something that's great for us. Something that we should celebrate and look forward to watching. Something we shouldn't boycott.
Now, leaving NWA at this time. But I do encourage everybody to read Jerry Heller's book called Ruthless, because in his book, he actually admits, how does he phrase it? I meant to pull it for this interview. It's in my library somewhere, but he actually says that if conspiracy, to paraphrase, if conspiracies exist in the Black community against Black people, then him and Eazy-E were just pawns in the machinations. He says this in his book, Ruthless, a memoir by Jerry Heller. Go back and check it out.
That's funny.
Now, do you believe, now overall, as far as that period, before we leave it, do you believe that we as elders now, in our 50s and 60s, have a responsibility to go back and correct those errors? Because I see people like special ed. I see people like D1 over the last couple of months going back and saying, okay, this is what went wrong. I think special ed got a lot of heat for talking about NWA, how they, destroyed the Black community. Do you think we as elders have a responsibility to go back and create those mistakes if we're going to get rid of if we're going to have the moral platform to correct the youth today? Because the youth would say, the excuse is, well, you didn't correct the 2 Live crew when you were growing up. Y'all sat back and let NWA and all these other groups do whatever they want to do, and y'all would justify it. How you going to correct me when y'all said nothing to your generation?
Yeah, number one, I don't seek to correct the kids because it's not the kids' fault. It's the adults that left the door open. And even the adults left the door open because they didn't know it was open and what was coming in. So in terms of going back, like I don't necessarily think it's as a history teacher, yeah, we go back and we use examples, we draw parallels, we create analogies to help teach about, what was going on in the past. And for what I do is I draw a parallel to myself as a kid. I don't talk down to the kids. I don't even disrespect their music per se. I disrespect the machine that's, promoting their music. I disrespect the people that's promoting their music. I disrespect capitalism. And put it in the context of them understanding capitalism and us being victims of capitalism, us being targeted with war. And I'm trying to think how I was getting ready to answer one of your questions you just asked. I always mention, like I mentioned to you, that I grew up listening to NWA and Mobb Deep, so I can relate to what y'all are going through right now, but no one ever stepped in during that time when I was listening to that music and gave me a framework within which to understand what was taking place. Nobody. And I don't blame the grown men in my life because maybe they didn't know enough, or they might have been locked up. Who knows? My parents did the best they could. I grew up in a 2-parent household. They did the best they could. I had uncles, I had grandfathers and all of that, but they did the best they could raising us with the tools that they were equipped with. But I think so if they didn't know, then what else could they do? You know what I mean?
But I think there were a couple of elders, not a lot, because in that time the elders were still into Earth, Wind, and Fire, and they weren't into hip hop that much. But if you look historically, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan laid the program out in the Jack the Rapper speech in 1980. Dr. Bobby E. Wright, in his essays, A Psychopathic Racial Personality, he broke down street knowledge back prior to 1980. Dr. Francis Cress Welton broke down the symbolism and the terminologies back down the same. So it was out there, but I don't think that it was done in a manner that put it directly in opposition to hip hop.
None of our schools teach us about what we're talking about. None of our schools introduce us to any of those authors that you just mentioned. I didn't know about any of them people until I got into my 20s and 30s. Right. So you can't blame the adults that are produced or created from these schools. I was lucky because I was on my path to become a superintendent and all that. And all I cared about was the steps along the way and making money. So I was fortunate to have a brother that stepped in and said, this dude has some know-how. Maybe I could turn the light on for him. I was lucky in that regard because a lot of my friends around me, they don't have that light turned on. I do have some conscious friends, but the vast majority of them are not conscious and could care less about what we're talking about in this conversation right now. And I don't blame them for it because this stuff wasn't taught in our schools. In terms of music and what was taught in school, you mentioned Earth, Wind, and Fire. One of the things my father did for me was he kept that good music playing in the home. Earth, Wind, and Fire, the Commodores, Marvin Gaye. I got all of that. And so that was my foundation for music. And I was born in 1970, but I had all of that as a foundation. And so it wasn't hard to get me to appreciate good music, instrumentation, compositions, a great singer, versus somebody that's just in the studio. But you go to the schools now, the vast majority of our public schools don't have music teachers or instruments. And the adults that are adults now that are raising children don't even know what Earth, Wind, and Fire sound like, the vast majority of them in their 30s, unless their parents introduced to them. And most of our parents was listening to, or most of the people our generation was already listening to NWA and all that other business and wasn't really going back and introducing their kids to Earth, Wind, and Fire, the Commodores, and all of that good music. And so there's a disconnect there, but that disconnect, the system, the machinery has helped to basically widen that disconnect by making certain that our kids don't even know or appreciate good music because it's not in the schools. You don't have a music teacher that's teaching that stuff to them.
But you are correct, brother, and I agree with what you're saying. The information was out there. The critiques of popular culture was out there. But if you don't have anybody to direct you to those sources, because, I didn't know about, like you said, I didn't know about Dr. Francis Cress Welton, and I was introduced to the teachings of, to a large degree, Malcolm X and Kwame Ture and even to a degree, the teachings of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan via hip hop. It was Griff. You know, it was when Griff and them used to put the shout outs and the read this book, read that book, that, you know, I started reading the liner notes. I'm like, okay, maybe I need to go back and read those.
Man,
but
KRS-One had Kwame Ture on his album, and I didn't realize it until I got older.
yeah. I mean, it was not Blueprint. It was Edutainment. It was Edutainment. And I didn't really know until recently. I didn't know until recently that they actually had a relationship. And Kwame Ture was one of his mentors. I didn't know that until recently.
Oh, wow. One of KRS-One's mentors?
Yeah, Kwame Ture.
I didn't know that either.
Because there are things that there were relationships back then that we really don't know about. I think there were elders attempting to influence hip hop even back in the day. If you look at I forgot his African name, excuse me, Sonny Carson, Baba Sonny Carson. His influence with Black Watch Movement and X-Clan. It's not talked about. We don't connect these dots. We don't connect the dots between those who actually were connected to the movements. I mean, the influence of the Nation of Islam to hip hop, that's really not even dealt with hardly. It's talked about, you know, they might talk about the NGE and the 5 percenters, but tracing it back to Message to the Black Man, people don't talk about that. So there were those connections when you're dealing with Kwame Ture.
We had plenty of distractions. And I also want to give credit to, you know, even in college, I went to the University of Illinois, predominantly white, to say the least. But I heard Kwame Ture at the University of Illinois. So we had different groups that were influenced and fueled by that music to know who Kwame Ture was. So we had him come down. We had, oh my goodness, I can't think of the brother's name from Chicago. Coakley, Steve Coakley. I heard I heard Cress Wilson. I think it might have been in Illinois. I think she came to Illinois. But again, the connection to the music. So we did get a chance to hear them. And that should have politicized us. But again,
let me throw this right at there, brother. I just want to address this issue. Sonny Carson taught Professor X. That was actually his father, Lumumba. That was his father. So go ahead, brother.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay, but I forgot my train of thought. We had introductions, but when you're thinking about the system and how it works, we had the books that were out there. The books were all around us. We wasn't going to the bookstores getting them. You know, we got Black bookstores in just about every urban area in the United States. But if you go in the bookstore, there's nobody in them. You know, every bookstore, when I used to go home and visit the bookstore in Chicago in Hyde Park, it would be no more than one person in that store. People walking all up and down 53rd Street, all up in the clothing stores and the gym shoe stores, but one person in the bookstore. And so they eventually closed. That bookstore is gone now. A bookstore I supported in Dallas, they had to mess around. They had to move and they reconfigured, and they're still doing well now. But like I'm not going to say they're struggling. They're not struggling now, but she's so potent that she's had to basically, I'm not even going to say force herself, but she's such a good sister. I feel the obligation to support and do what I can and to promote her bookstore to make sure she stays open, but there's not the preponderance of people pouring into her bookstore that there should be. Because she literally has all of our books, all of our artifacts. She literally goes to Africa and brings stuff back for the community, you know, to purchase, to know about. She lets programs go on in the bookstore, but Pan-African Connection in Dallas. It was Frontline Books in Chicago. But we ain't going to the bookstores. And I've never had a teacher in high school or in junior high that said, go to this bookstore and get some books and read those books. Read this book that was written by some white people in Texas, though, so you can pass this test. Yeah. So you can go to college, so you can get a job. That was it for me.
The influence of Frontline, that whole movement cannot be underrated at all. That combination between what is the Ghetto Times, Frontline, and the teachings of Baba Steve Coakley. It's not talked about in our community, but a lot of people now, when they start talking about the secret societies, the Illuminati, that came from Frontline, the Ghetto Times, and Baba Steve Coakley. Continue, brother.
And it's frustrating to piggyback off of what you just said, talking about all of the stuff that goes on in the background. I don't use the word Illuminati or anything like that, but there are machinations and apparatus that are set up. There are conspiracies that are taking place. You had somebody that came out, an entertainer who's basically benefited from the same things, to come out and quote unquote expose some people. I'm not even going to say his name because I don't even want to blow it up any further, but this happens like every so often with some angry entertainer who's been jaded by the system, wants to come out and expose everybody else.
Yeah.
And so if you understand class consciousness, how that works, if you understand capitalism, if you understand propaganda, if you understand the entertainment industry, you don't need a jaded entertainer to come out and tell you that these people are compromised. Because class consciousness will teach you, once somebody is gifted, if we're the most oppressed race on the planet, and somebody gifted a black person $1 billion, who gave them that $1 billion, number one, and gave them that $1 billion for what? What are they doing with that $1 billion? And what is their value to us versus their value to the people that are paying them? And that comes with understanding class consciousness, the nature of capitalism, the nature of the plantation, the nature of ownership, the nature of owners, all of that. Football, basketball, all of our entertainers, all of the rich people that, you know, they got us celebrating and worshiping are owned. They're literally all owned, which is why they're paid. They're paid to basically serve an agenda, not to serve us. They're only here to entertain us. And they entertain us by basically saturating our subconscious with the messages that their owners allowed them to get to us. You know, we had even Phyllis Hyman, an artist way back then, that was saying that people like, Clive Davis, were telling them, we don't want those kind of messages. Keep it kind of poppy and light. You know, we don't want you trying to teach your people.
Who allegedly committed suicide.
Allegedly, exactly. You know, I was going to get to that. I mentioned that in the book. I ain't going to get into mentioning the whole line of artists that allegedly committed suicide or were druggies or drug addicts. The Rolling Stones are each 100 years old, 150 years old. The biggest drug addicts we know, but they all still alive. But you got people, I'm not going to drop names, but we have entertainers in their 50s that can still jump off speakers and do splits with a guitar, but they died as being drug addicts, and we're supposed to believe that. And just accept it because Channel 7 is telling us, or the newspaper's telling us.
And that particular artist that you just mentioned, Prince, also exposed the industry.
Warner Records.
Warner Brothers.
Yep.
Also exposed it. So go back and study. You know, we like to listen to Purple Rain and we like to listen to the 1999 album. Go back and watch those documentaries. I think it's one on Tubi, I think, called Slave. I think that's what it's called. But go back and watch those Prince documentaries. Go back, and when Michael Jackson was under attack, he started hanging with Sharpton and pointing out Tommy, the owner of Tommy Records.
Mottola and Sony.
Go back, rewind that, pull that again. See, sometimes we miss things because we're focused on other things. Go back and research. Because continue, brother.
No, you said it. The prevailing message is we are at war, and as long as we don't understand that, we're going to continue to be compromised and exploited and manipulated. But that's the nature of capitalism too. It's the nature of capitalism, and I tell my kids, and I leave the word capitalism on the board, along with other words like imperialism, colonization, classism, caste systems, settler colonialism. All of those words stay on my board. Whatever we teach, and those words don't go nowhere because I understand how the subconscious mind works. And so even in middle school, them kids will never be able to say that those words somehow don't resonate with them. Nobody explained capitalism to me in detail till I was in my 30s. Like, how does that happen? But that's the nature of our miseducation system. Though. They don't want you to know what you need to know. But they'll allow financial literacy to get out there, which will help you to adapt to this system and become more of an individually wealthy individual by participating in capitalism and becoming a co-exploiter. You know, you want to invest in the stock market, which is basically exploiting our people all over the world. You know, you want to pay these banks and stuff like that, but you don't want to participate in any meaningful way in uplifting your community or giving back to that community because you're focused on individual wealth.
I think that one of the keys to us unraveling this whole contradiction of hip hop is dialectical socialism. I think if we apply those principles, the Hegelian dialectical principle, Griff always talks about that. The dialectical, the Hegelian dialectical principles and science and dialectics and all that things. If we apply those, the idea of raising the contradictions to hip hop, I think that's the key because it will unravel a lot of things. See, we speak from emotion, we speak from how we feel. But if you take the emotion out and apply dialectical materialism, that's what I meant to say, dialectical materialism to this phenomenon and see it as a phenomenon. And I think that's what you're doing in the book. It's a phenomenon. Anything that exists is a phenomenon. So if we apply those principles to hip hop, I think we could, without emotion, really raise the antagonistic contradictions. And that's the whole thing.
Man, heightening the contradictions. Chairman Fred Hampton.
Yes, sir.
Heightening the contradictions. That is, man, that's my mantra. And they provide us with so much. As an educator, there is no excuse for you to not be bringing that stuff before your kids. All of these contradictions, whether it's a politician, an entertainer, like watching Kanye spiral out of control, our emotional side and us worshiping that dude, oh, his mama died and he's not on his medication. That dude ain't crazy. He ain't that crazy. You know what I mean? My mama died and I didn't just go nuts and start hating black people. It didn't make me run into the arms of white women when my mama died. But you watch the whole arc of his existence and somebody that went to being almost a billion to being a billionaire. And what he was seeking to do, individual wealth, capitalist, materialist, all of that business. But then you confront the nature of capitalism for real. There are owners. You don't become an owner. You are a pawn in the game. You are an African. You are only here for our exploitation, for our manipulation. And once you start talking like you think you want to be an owner, you're going to find out some realities. And the whole thing for me is if we're not educated enough, our artists, I'll give one artist credits that I love so much, Add Two in Chicago. I always got to drop his name because that brother, he's a younger brother. I think he's in his 20s or young 30s. But I listened to his album, the Jim Crow, I think it's called Jim Crow, the new Jim Crow. Look up that album though, but it's one of the baddest albums, the most refreshing albums I've heard in a while. But he's a young brother that understands how capitalism works. So I don't expect him to become a Kanye. Kanye's smart. He's not a dummy. But if you have somebody that's smart or whatever, and you're being introduced to stuff that's making you an individual, and I want to become like these white people. I want to be Gucci. I want to be Fendi. I want to be what's his? Get me dropping all these fashion brands, whatever. But he wanted to be them. He wanted to be the owner of the plantation. And the plantation owners literally slapped him and told him that's not how it works, son. And so he went on a rant because they wouldn't let him in. But what a whole bunch of them was done, man. We're watching it now. Cat Williams, I'll go ahead and say his name. You realize that this ain't for you. This ain't about you. You are a tool. And no matter how much money we give you, you are still what we told you you were back in the 1970s and 80s. We give you $1 billion, which means that we're making $100 billion off of you. Basketball, they giving LeBron $100 million or whatever they giving that brother. You best believe that it's a whole bunch of Europeans that are making exponentially more for that dude. And so they have no problem giving him that money. And number one, that. And number two, he's going to turn around and give all of that money right back to them through consumption. We don't own the means of production. And so if our kids understand that and it becomes almost like an operating system for them, they're not going to be exploited and manipulated in that way.
Indeed. Indeed. Brother, we could have this conversation for hours. The people in the chat still loving it. Shout out to everybody in the chat. We got the Norfolk New Black Panther Party in the chat. We got Brother Shabazz in the chat. We got Red in the chat. We got Adika in the chat who's doing work in Boston. We got Brother Quabner, Clear the Airwaves in the chat. Quabner, you next on the interview list, bro.
That's my man. Me and Quabner work with
next on the interview.
Yeah, I met him. It's crazy how long it's been. I was back living in Chicago for a minute, but we're trying to start a movement or organization, Culture Freedom, I think it was. But me and him and his significant at the time, we wound up creating the Clear the Airways project to deal with this music, to deal with media in general, and to go at these sponsors and to try to get, laws or whatever, however we could work with it to get this stuff off the radio that's targeting our kids. We sat down with the radio programmers, we did all of that. Quabana's, even being couple of more years older than me, has a lot more energy than I do. That brother be all over the place, but
he's committed.
Huh?
He's committed.
Oh, definitely committed.
That brother's committed.
My commitment is, in the schools where I'm getting fired every other year because I'm teaching these kids, the stuff they need to know. And it's funny. I heard a conversation the other day where somebody was saying we can work through these public schools to get stuff done. And I'm like, you got to work in these schools to understand that it ain't gonna never happen in these public schools, because the public schools are one of the main components of what we have today. The capitalists need the public schools to continue to stay in control. They're not going to let you come in, spook that sat by the door, greenly, and change nothing about the education system. You will be fired first. You will be blacklisted first. Pardon my use of that word, blacklisted. But you will be dismissed first, and I've already experienced it as an educator. And so I salute brothers like Marcus Klein, who have opened up those safe spaces for not only the teachers to be able to teach what's needed, but for the students to be able to learn, to be cultivated, to become real African people. You know what I mean? It's not happening in these schools. It's not. And I've worked in no less than 15 schools in 30 years. And I can probably say on 3 fingers, not a whole hand, Afro-centered teachers that I've come across that are teaching these kids the way they need to be taught.
Wow. In the last 5 minutes, brother, it's been an honor. I need you to give the information if people want to have you come do a lecture. Who else I need to shout out? Let's see, Brother Azriel, Freedom Fighter, Brother Azriel, Brother Mitchell, and I think that's everybody. Brother Jafar, if I didn't put your name, shout you out, drop something in the chat. But brother, in these last 4 or 5 minutes, tell everybody how to get your book, how to get in contact with you. They want you to come lecture, and your website, contact information, how to get the book and everything.
All right, well, again, shout out to Quabana and the Clear the Airways project, trying to get this work done. As far as getting in contact with me, my email address is info at Status No. Status No is the name of my business, and it's the name under which I publish my book. Status No, STATUSKNO. info at statusno.com. I've been doing workshops for years. I have no problem doing them virtual. If you have a classroom set up where I can speak to a group of kids, I have no problem traveling. As long as it works with my schedule. I'm an educator as well, so I got to be at work, but we can schedule on a weekend or off day. But I've gone up to New Jersey. I've gone to places in Houston or whatever and taught. And basically the lectures or the workshops are around the book. Me and Quabin have gone up to Milwaukee and actually did workshops talking about this stuff, giving them the information that me and you were talking about. Groups of 100 kids or 200. My preference is to talk to smaller groups because they tend to be more intimate, and you can have those one-on-one conversations. You can go a little bit deeper. Nobody wants to talk to 200 kids because that's a lot. But in terms of getting the book, like I said, info at statusno.com. My website is statusno.com.
Spell it out, brother, because people are going to be hitting me. What did he say, brother? How do you say get the book? Or they're going to be like, well, do you have the book, brother? No, this last remaining copy I have is for the youth.
I'll send you some more. But it's
brother, you've done plenty. You've done plenty, brother. You've done plenty.
No, go ahead, brother. Status No. It's not status quo, but Status No. STATUSKNO.com. Just place an order through there. I guess I could you could put the link in. You got a chat, not on here, not on StreamYard.
What I can do is when I put it on YouTube and put it in when I download it, I'll do that.
And I'll put a link to the book there as well. But Everything is there. But again, I enjoy, you know, I'll do a couple of freebies. Most of the ones I've done have been free in terms of workshops. I've rarely gotten paid for doing them. But that needs to change because it's a lot that goes into that. But I do workshops. You got a group of kids that I need to come talk to, or you want me to come talk to, or a group of adults, a group of community members, whatever, I'll come holler.
All right. Brother, it has been an honor. We got to do this again with your when your time available. There's a lot of stuff we could have gone into, brother, but I wanted to keep it under an hour so I can put it on Instagram with no problems to get it more exposure. This has been beautiful, brother. We didn't even get into Sexy Red and all those. So next time we're going to deal with the hip hop of today. So, brother, it's been an honor, brother. Any closing words?
Yeah. Yeah, we definitely need to talk about the minstrel show because that's a whole another 55 minutes in itself. The minstrel show that's being put on display now. That goes back to the Step and Fetches. Nothing new. Please go to Clear the Airwaves Project as well. Clear the Airwaves Project is on Facebook. Go there, like the page or whatever, and follow the actions that are taking place under that banner of Clear the Airwaves Project because we've been going at the Grammys, the Image Awards, the NAACP Awards, you know, all of these cartoons and pretenders that are basically promoting and putting out there what toxifies our children and our people.
Indeed, indeed. Again, brother, it's been an honor. Thank you so much. Please, y'all, get this book. Get this book. Support the brother. Get this book because I didn't ask the brother. Brother found out I was passing out books in the hood. He's like, look, brother, I'm a senior. So I said, brother, they ain't necessary. Sister Veronica, thank you again for your book donation because one of the things we do is give out great books in the community, great books in the hood. So want to thank everybody who had Brother Dika, everybody who's participated. I think I shouted everybody else out. So I want to give a shout out to the Black Messiahs. I want to give a shout out to the Black Hoodie Brigade. And the Black Hoodie Brigade is a movement whereby you just throw on a black hoodie, throw on some African beads, and hit the hood. No leaders, no real organization, just a movement to raise the consciousness of the people. Because once you raise the conscience of the people will organize themselves. Again, brother, I appreciate you. We leave with the Black Messiah motto: stop waiting for a savior and be one. Shalom.
Thank you, brother. Thank you.